Sorry, I forgot to push the other button, so we just started recording. In many ways, we can't say it with honesty unless we're forever changing it and moving forward. If it becomes static, a creed loses its power. Why? Because what are we trying to describe in a creed?
Our beliefs.
Yeah, but more than that, our beliefs in something that is infinite and undescribable. And so if you set something in stone, you've taken the undescribable and you've said, this is all it is. And so his point is that it's got to be something beyond. In his book, A New Christianity, in the last chapter, he talks about encountering a young woman in his later years as she's going, working on her Master's of Divinity. And he says, she became my teacher. And this lady who named Katie said, a creed is a border maker, designed to tell who was an insider in the Christian faith and who was not. No Christian creed is a full statement of faith. It is only the Christian community's ecclesiastical response to arguments. This creed, meaning the apostles, has like the flood, rendered our traditional religious dwelling places no longer habitable. Isn't that an interesting statement? But we hold up the creed as if it is the perfect description of this. And his thing is, we can start from the creed, but we have to say what it is that how it helps and how it doesn't help any longer. Okay, so I want to share my screen and show you what we're going to do. So this is our syllabus, and if you click on the link in the chat, then you'll be able to get it. You can see that what we're doing is we're going to go through a week or so on each different thing, and this will carry us through till March, at least. If you guys want to talk even more, it'll take longer. Depends on how much you're going to talk. So his God proposition is rather large, and so I've put a couple weeks for that. His Christ proposition is rather large, and that'll lead us into Christmas. I thought that was a good way to get into Christmas, was to talk about who this Christ is. We'll put a couple of them together, original sin and virgin birth. And then down here, when we get to Easter, I'm guessing that Proposition 8 about the ascension isn't going to take as much time for us to talk about. All right. And Sandy, just so you know, I will send this to you. You can click on the link and be able to get it, or I will send it to you by email. And okay. So I think that probably the Easter proposition will bleed into the ascension proposition, or ethics, which is another big one, will kind of bleed into, because when we talk about ethics, that's probably where he's beginning to talk more about spirit. And so I think we'll need some time with that. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going with that. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, I'm just going to need it emailed to me too, because I didn't get anything in chat.
Okay, I will send this stuff out to everyone, so you've got it. Notice that we're taking Thanksgiving week off, not because we couldn't do it on Wednesday, but on Thursday. The two classes then I think would appreciate us not meeting that day. And then we're taking off both Christmas and the holiday. Everyone knows what the holiday is, right?
Tony's birthday.
That's my wife's birthday, the day after Christmas. And so we're going to take off for a couple weeks then, okay? And then after we've all done whatever visiting we're going to do, we'll come back together in the beginning of January. All right, any questions about that?
Sounds good.
So I want to share a different thing. It's what I've been reading off of already, but it's kind of what we're going to be doing today. And I'm going to enlarge it so that you don't have to look at the second side until later. So the thing I just barely read right here is a good quote, and but I want to deal with the first two chapters of his Why Christianity Must Change or Die. And the first one is about the Christian creed, and the second is about exile. And that forms much of his work. He believes that right now we are in exile as we're trying to figure out what this time means to us. Okay, so let me read this down here, which comes from the end of his Christianity book. He says, so what the exile has done is free us from the killing, idolatrous limits of the religions of the world, including our own Christianity. The gods of those religious systems have also died. The God of church, synagogue, and temple is no more. The magical, personalistic, manipulative, supernatural, and sometimes vindictive power of those deities has been used historically not to enhance life, but to bless the status quo, to increase priestly power, and to support those claims of state that have expanded the wealth and power of the ruling classes. How have you felt? Let me get back to where you can see pictures. How have you felt the negative experience of how church religion has defined things? The magical or personalistic or manipulative or supernatural, sometimes vindictive powers of church. How have you felt that in your life? Why is it, for example, Sandy, did Spong's writing speak to your mind as he's drawing you away from what had been?
Well, it just seemed like they were putting belief in a tight box and they weren't letting it expand into love.
Yeah.
It was more have to and more, there wasn't the love behind it. I'm trying to think of an example. When I took this to a Presbyterian church down here, we had two people that were Jews for Jesus. And when I was reading some of the Spong words to them, they said, where did you get this? Who is this? And I got them to start reading Spong. And they said, this is unbelievable, because we were taught one way and it was too restrictive. And now we see that, I can't even think of one concrete example because there were so many in How Christianity Must Change or Die, because they were changing from Judaism and seeing the power of Christ. It seemed like Spong was releasing this power all over again. It was
Thank you. That's perfect. That's a perfect description, I think, of what many of us have felt. And the hard part is that one of the things that church does well, or any religion does well, is it gives us right answers, good answers, answers that carry us forward. Right? How many have found at least some right answers in church, especially when your pastor speaks? How many have also learned that some people hold up their right answer as the infinitely right answer, the unquestionable right answer? Now, Kristen, in your case, your parents did have all the right answers. But
yep, I was very lucky. But yeah, and so we went to the Presbyterian church that, you know, was in Dad's family for a couple generations, and Mom's too, only in New York, not Grand Forks where I grew up. And then I moved to Montana, and I guess they did have a Methodist church, but I went to the Lutheran church. And it was just, you know, go along with the flow. Then I moved up and went to a small town Lutheran church. And a gay person moved to town in this little teeny town and was totally ostracized, tortured, and run out. He was an artist from Minneapolis and wanted to enjoy some small town solitude and really help the town out by, building nice structures, built a cute little kiosk for travelers to get information. But anyway, they ran him out, and the church people were saying, well, we can't support anybody different like that. So then I was like, well, I'm out of here then, I can't go with that. And we did, a new pastor came along and she agreed. So, she just tried to keep it low key, but, let people know she wasn't on board with that either. So they just kind of kept with their traditions.
Yeah.
But I kind of quit going. And then, my husband's Catholic. Well, when we moved to Scobie, has since been big in the Catholic Church. And I've had conflicts with that because then he'd expect me to go to services out of town, and I was not, allowed communion. And that was very offensive.
Right.
And he just couldn't see that, they're very black and white. Well, either you go through our sacraments or you don't partake in communion and you don't get a whole bunch of rights. They don't consider us married. We weren't married in the Catholic Church. So yeah, I've had a lot of conflicts. And then the most recent interesting thing is my Methodist minister said, the traditional way is the only way. When I went through seminary, I was taught all this stuff like, Spong's ideas. And he said, those teachings are blasphemous. It's not the right way. The traditional things of, what our story is about Christmas is the truth. The way Jesus died for our sins is the truth, rather than, a more the perspective that Spong has and that Borg has.
Yeah.
And that makes more sense to me.
That's right. And what you're describing is what Bishop Spong would call exile. That what the church has been and how it's been described to you no longer holds the truth, for you at least, that it wants to give to you. That for you, you're sitting in a space, a wilderness, trying to figure out how to find. Anybody else have that same type of description of much of your journey, where at some point or another you were exiled away from the church?
Well, and I see the big exile in my husband's church. It's the congregation has shrunk to teensy weensy. They're all old people. He's the youngest one there.
Yeah.
And the younger people are all saying, I'm not going through all those sacraments,
right?
Because I don't believe in them.
Right.
They'll have their kids go to CCD because it's fun things. There's a free meal and they want them to know certain things about God.
Yeah. And the very fact that most of our youth, and by youth, I mean people that are 40 and below, like yourself, Kristen. The fact that most of those folks are not in church is because we have drawn lines, like you said, you can't have communion because, and they know that there's something that's wrong about that type of thing. And yet that's the old way that the church defines itself, and not speaking to how is it the church and God might speak into this moment.
I had a lot of the same stuff when I was with the evangelicals for a long time. And I remember when I was at Calvary Chapel, it was like I kind of adopted him when he was 9. But anyway, this young man was in my life and he came out as gay when he was 10. And it was like, I was told by the church that I was being shunned because I wasn't willing to tell him he was going to hell if he didn't change his ways. So I was literally ostracized because of that. And he was locked in his house with no phone, no computer, no TV, no nothing, because, you know, he was invaded by demons and stuff, you know. And then when I went to another different church, I didn't even know what evangelical meant to these churches. I just was like, okay, they're non-denominational. I thought that I just was so out of it as far as what all the different churches mean. But this other church then was, I remember this couple came in and they were like, they were so upset because their son had done something so horrible and they couldn't deal with it. They couldn't talk about it, but they needed lots of prayers about it. And I thought, oh my God, I wonder what he did. He must have killed somebody. And they were like, this went on for a couple of weeks. And finally in private one time, the woman told me he's gay. And I almost laughed out loud. I mean, I almost laughed in her face, but I kept myself straight because I'm like, this wouldn't be very smart. But it was like, she said, I don't know what we did wrong. You know, it's like, and they couldn't deal with the fact that their son was gay. And it was just they have a very, I call it peeping Tom God, who is very judgmental. It's all about judgment. And this was, I had to leave and come to St. Francis during the election of Trump because they were just so pro-Trump and stuff. And it's a whole different view. I just wanted to say, have you guys read the Sermon on the Mount?
Yeah.
You know, and it was like, I was getting a whole different message from the Bible studies they were doing than what they were teaching. So when I came to St. Francis and you did a thing on Spong, I was like, yes, this is what I've been looking for.
You know, and the hard part, Judy, is that sometimes the easiest way to define ourselves and world is in connection to the word no, especially when I look at you and I want to say what you can't be, what you shouldn't do, what, you know, all those no's that I want to give you, which is basically a controlling thing by me, right? No's control people really easily, more easily than trust. And so we do a lot of that in churches, limiting the yes of life. And so Bishop Spong goes on to say in Why Christianity Must Change or Die, he goes on to say that the God who is the ground of being cannot be so owned. That phrase, ground of being, is how he often describes God, just so you know. The God who is the ground of being cannot be so owned. God is a universal presence undergirding all of life. God does not bless or curse individuals according to an imposed prescription of conduct. God, the source of life, calls all to live fully. God, the source of love, calls us to live wastefully. God, the ground of being, calls us to have the courage to be ourselves. So when we live, love, and have the courage to be, we are engaged in worship. We are expanding our humanity. We are breaking out of barriers. That to me is, I think, very descriptive of what Bishop Spong's life work has been. To draw us from a small definition of a God who, and a structure around that God that's only small, to something that is larger and relational. To live, to love, to be. That's about empowerment, isn't it?
Mhm.
And how many felt empowered by some of those things that you escaped from, some of those doctrines that made it so that you went into exile? I'd venture to say that that's one of the reasons why we left that easy place, in some ways easy, and went into the harder world of questioning Christianity. Questions are hard, aren't they? Answers make it simpler for us to lay a path, to know just where we're going. But they also limit because we don't know how to go beyond those answers. So much of Bishop Spong's work is to ask different questions than what have been asked before. When you think about that, what are some of the questions that, as you think back on Bishop Spong, that he's asked in a way that it led you forward? What were some of the questions there? I look at just this last book that's called Unbelievable. One of the things that he asked me to do is what, from my background, from my growing up in religion, was there were all kinds of answers that said, this is what to believe. In fact, we had a set of things that we said, I believe this, I believe this, I believe this. And what the question that he tossed at me was, what is unbelievable right now? What is it that you don't quite have an answer for? Because I thought religion was about answers growing up, and I knew all the right answers. What if it's not about having the right answers? That was the big question that I had, that he gave to me. And even though I couldn't answer the question, it gave me comfort because it was okay to be able to not have the answer. What questions did he give to you?
Well, I think maybe all of us, when we're asked to recite the Apostles' Creed as a I believe statement, we kind of don't believe a lot of it.
Yeah, I
There are
think,
statements that are too traditional, that are just said because they've been said for centuries.
yeah, I think we all mumble parts of it. Thank you, Pam. It is okay to question. But
It's not only okay, it's absolutely necessary.
it's absolutely necessary.
And that's why I just loved working with first graders and small children, because there's no question out of bounds for them. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of their questions can't be answered. They're just, they're just not answerable. But other questions, they're just seeking for answers all the time. That's their job.
Yeah, questions like, does God have a wife?
Yeah, and what does God look like, and where does God live, and all kind. I mean, and things about the natural world that they want to know and can't be explained, maybe ever, but certainly not yet. But it's also hard to live with just the questions. It feels a little not like exile, but like being set afloat.
Standing in an earthquake.
Yeah, maybe. And you have to trust the water if you're in a boat or on a surfboard or whatever. But and that's what makes it so difficult to talk about.
Yeah.
When there's an established belief and a thing to repeat, you just fall back on that. Well, that's the answer.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm floundering for words because there aren't words to fit the infinite. And I can work on that, but I can't ever really hone it down to a solid thing.
Yeah.
So I think of it as the difference between something solid and hard and maybe brittle, and something that's fluid, and certainly softer and more forgiving.
Mhm.
And yet
than
and we still need faith. So that's kind of a big question. How do we have faith?
Yeah.
When we don't have concrete, visible answers.
You know, the thing of it is, Kristen, is we sometimes define faith as in concrete forms, right? When we say the creed, we sometimes say, I believe in God and I know exactly what God is,
Mhm.
which is simpler if that's true. But it's not necessarily reality. Usually it means that, well, let me tell you a story. I have a favorite book. It's called The Carpenter and the Unbuilder. I probably talked to you about it before. It's by a man named David Griebner. And the title refers to two men. It's a series of stories. And one of the stories that he tells throughout the book is about two men that are on a journey. And they're on a journey to get to the capital city to have lunch with the king. That's where they're going. The problem is every time they stop for the night and they put up a little shelter to be safe for the night, the carpenter, one of the two travelers, he wakes up the next morning and goes, I can make this shelter better. And so he begins to stay there to improve the shelter. And he forgets that it's the journey that they're on. That it doesn't matter if this shelter is a good shelter or not. That's not where they're supposed to stay. And I think that's important, because I think what Bishop Spong is trying to teach us is that we're not supposed to stay in the theological spaces that we're in, even if they have 2 centuries worth of evidence behind them and thought behind them and concreteness behind them. That we're on a journey to somewhere and we're supposed to continue moving.
So
And
even if I could put into words what I think or what I believe, I should still keep searching for better.
we should hold
Or
all things
better.
loosely, right? And that's not what we want to do, because if it's something as important as God in our lives, we think we have to hold it strong and defend it against whoever would try to take it away from me. And the bottom line is, the one who typically is trying to take our truth away from us is, guess who? The divine presence, drawing us to something better or more appropriate for today's space rather than 10 years ago space. It's not that the answer was wrong 10 years ago. It's that today you're facing something different than what you were facing. And so you need to hold and use God in a different way today than what you did 10 years ago.
And I think for me, Judy, too, I call that kind of like embracing the mystery.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, I've always asked people, like I said for a long time, I didn't believe in God. And because it's how someone defines God, whether or not I believe in that. I mean, if you think God is this man on a throne with a long flowing white beard, no, I don't believe in that God. If God is a mysterious, universal, not nameless force that I can't even put any kind of, as soon as I think you trying to find God, you have put God into a box, and that to me is not good. So I have a hard time with that whole God. I always ask people, how do you define God? Whether or not I believe in your God, because that's just such a nebulous thing to me, you know. And I know a lot of my friends back from the evangelical days can't have, I mean, they just simply, Spong is a heretic because you can't question, it's too scary. Like I have a very good close, my very bestest friend. It's like she's a liberal Christian, but she still can't handle Spong or Borg because she needs to believe her beliefs and it's too scary for her to challenge them. And I respect that, so I don't. But to me, it's a mystery. And faith is something, I don't even know what faith.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, I have a hard time defining some of these things.
And we should have that hard time. The problem, Judy, often is this. We forget that everything that we hold as firm truth was invented by some man or woman back in the ages. So the Apostles' Creed, which much of the study is going to be working against what was written in stone in the 5th century, that was written by people of that time to try to define what they thought about God, but it doesn't mean that their definition of that God was any more inspired than what we might come up with today. Maybe because it was done in community, it would be better than what I would come up alone, but maybe it's not better than what we would come up in this community, right? And our job is to think about the same type of things that they thought about and try to say, who is this God? And not try to deify a set of words just because they've been around for 1,500 years. Any set of words. But you know, one of the things that group of people also did is they're the ones who closed our canon and said God doesn't speak anymore. God's finished speaking, Bible is finished. And so they had a certain amount of where they passed that on to each generation saying, don't think you can think about God anymore. Don't think you can hear God anymore. Stop and just believe what we've defined as God. And for 1,500 years, we've been limited by that set of actions. How well does that define
I love
God?
searching the history of Christianity so much, because once you learn the history of how Christianity became a patriarchal, hierarchical religion, starting back in the 3rd century, and you learn the history of, like, I was always interested in how certain books got in the Bible and certain books didn't.
Mhm.
What precepts we believe in and what we don't, how things got, who decided all that? You
Yeah.
know, and to me, I always used to say, you know, it's like, well, the Bible was written by a bunch of men who thought the world was flat. So, I mean, it's not like a lot's changed since then, but the basic underlying knowledge a lot of times is wondrous.
Right.
But the theology, I just always have wondered. And so to me, my mind has been blown open by just studying that history of how it all came about.
Right. And the hard part, Judy, too, you like the creeds, and most of what we say is the right way to do Christianity, that was defined, I believe, more from a political standpoint than what it was a religious standpoint. Okay, it was assertions by the Emperor of Rome at the time saying, you got to come up with exactly who you are, and if you do, then I'll make you the Holy Roman Empire. Right? And Constantine essentially co-opting the church by making them limit themselves down, by, in essence, taking out Holy Spirit, the ongoing presence and voice of God.
Well, I think that to me, Jesus is the way shower. And that's why Spong is so important, because he kind of cuts all this middle stuff up and he goes back and he says, okay, we were shown the way.
Mhm.
This is it.
Mhm.
Just you had a way shower. What's the big deal?
Yeah, and I'm gonna show you that in just a little bit, or Sandy. So let me share with you the propositions. What we're gonna do is go through 12 different propositions, and they are the different clauses of the Apostles' Creed. So here they are. God, Jesus Christ, and I believe in God the Eternal Father, right? I believe in Jesus Christ. Here's the different ways that he's going to lead to us. Some of those things have taken more of a backseat for many of us. For example, I rarely care or talk about the virgin birth, but it is huge in some of our Christian circles these days, isn't it? You come from a Catholic background, that has much more importance. Okay. Like I said about the ascension, he ascended into heaven, talking about Jesus. Well, I think that's an image, but for some people that has more importance, especially because then your conservative friends said, well, he had to ascend so that he could descend and come back in that second coming. And so that has implications for them, that direction. When you look at each of these titles for the 12 sections we're going to do, which ones appeal to you? Which ones seem important to you, and which ones are less important? I guess what I'm saying is, where do you want us to spend time?
Well, I'd like to know different perspectives on all of the topics.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I'm not sure what universalism means, but prayer and miracles appeal to me.
Universalism is basically that which says God is the God of all, not just the God of a chosen few. I think all of those are good ones for us to look at.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
It's interesting to me, the word wisdom is not there.
That is an interesting thing. I think he would tie that somehow into ethics somehow, because I
Well,
think
that's what I was going to say. Probably of all those, none of that really speaks to me except for maybe ethics.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, it's according to how you define any of the other stuff, whether I even believe in it or think about it or anything.
Yeah. And if on the syllabus that I showed you earlier, we get off, I think it'll be on the ethics piece. Because like I said, for me, that's how does spirit play out in life? And that's a huge topic. There's a lot of implications of what that means, doesn't it? And so we have to figure that out. So let me kind of show you what each week will be like. Oh, wait, let me look at. Pam would like to learn more about the atonement. And that's a big thing, because a lot of people put huge emphasis on what exactly is that atonement. And Bishop Spong is trying to help us to see that in different ways than what we have, especially how it's been used in the past is blood atonement. Jesus's blood had to be shed in order to set us free. And Bishop Spong doesn't hold to that at all. So what is atonement for him? Okay, so let me show you the last document that you're going to get. And this is the 12 theses. And I'll try to get this to you as soon as possible. And here they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you can see there's all kinds of words with each one. But I want to show you what I did specifically. Let me make this a little larger so that you can see what we do. So here's God. the thing about God, and we won't go really into it, but it says understanding God in theistic terms as a being, supernatural in power, dwelling somewhere external to the world and capable of intervening in the world with miraculous power is no longer believable, says Dr. Spong. Most God talk in liturgy and conversation has thus become meaningless. What we must do is find the meaning to which the word God points. A new way to speak of God must be found. So that's what he's moving us towards. So here's the type of assignment that you're going to have each week. I went through the different books and I said, where does he talk about this proposition? So if you have the book, Why Christianity Must Change or Die, chapters 3 and chapter 4, those are good ones for you to look at. If you have the book, A New Christianity for a New World, chapters 2, 3, and 4 is what you want to look. If you have the book Unbelievable, it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can read all of those chapters if you would like to. You don't have to read any of them, but they will each help you to see some of what he means when he looks at this proposition and how he's drawing us to have a new way to speak about God. Now, let me step away from this just a second so we can see each other. In each case, you will have, I pulled out the different chapters you can read. Do you have those books, or do you need me to digitalize them and send them to you?
I don't have Unbelievable,
Okay.
and I'd be interested in looking at that.
Okay, Unbelievable is a good one to be able to use. How about the rest of you? Do you need them all digitalized, or what would you like?
I don't have Unbelievable either, but I'm thinking about getting it.
Okay, I will digitalize Unbelievable for us. Those chapters in particular this week. Do you have this first time? I'll just digitalize all of those chapters so that you've got them. You read as many of them as you want to, as you feel have time for, and then next week we'll just our task will be to just be in conversation and say, what of what he gave to us are you embracing fully? Which ones are you still struggling with? Which ones do you have no way of knowing how to get from here to there? Right? Because we have a lot of barriers still in achieving his ideas. Some of them within ourselves that we're not ready to do that. You know, Judy, you talked about the old man with the beard sitting on a throne. As much as we try to reject that, it is sometimes so deep within our head and our psyche that we sometimes fall back on that because it's just what was so foundational, how we understood God. And there's other things that we struggle with as well, and we don't know how to get past them. So maybe in the course of the conversation, somebody will have an idea that will draw you further down that road than what you would by yourself. That's what I hope will happen in all this. Because how many have already defined the perfect road towards God, and you're already walking it perfectly? Not any hands?
Nope.
My sister and I always talked about that. We didn't believe what the church was saying about, a big man on a throne with the white beard. A lot of the Sunday school things were. But we always felt that God was speaking to us inside.
Yeah.
And we had that feeling since childhood. So, Spong spoke to that to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I give you this sheet of paper that we were just looking at, and it has the 12 theses all lined up for you, and you go through and you start reading, just know that you do not have to read everything. Let me give you a good example of that. So here's the second one about Jesus the Christ. So here's a few chapters from Why Christianity Must Change. Here's a few chapters from A New Christianity. Here's a couple chapters from Unbelievable. And then look what he did down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 whole books he wrote about Jesus the Christ. I'm guessing that only Judy will read all 6 of those.
You must mean the other Judy.
Not me.
So it will be more reading than any of us can do completely week after week. So each of us will have to choose which passages seem to speak to us the most, how we do that. But the good news is that means that maybe I choose a couple of chapters that you didn't read, and you choose a couple chapters that somebody else didn't read. And between us, we kind of bring in more of the wholeness than what any of us would do by ourselves. And that in the conversation, we begin to help each other to take some steps, to understand some things, to see a little bit differently than what we would by ourselves. Is that fair? Is that a good thing?
Yep.
But go ahead.
I was just agreeing.
Okay. So I will get you the unbelievable. I'll make sure that I'll start that, and I will send that all out to you. For those who weren't able to do the documents that I put on chat, I will send that out to you. So you'll have all that. Okay. Know that the document I just showed you, when you look at that, and I titled it 12 Theses, if you that'll give you an idea of what to do throughout the time that we're doing this. And we have plenty of time to get to all of it. Like I said, just taking one a week brings us up to March. So you don't have to know everything yet. You'll have to know everything in a few months.
When
All
you
right.
think you know everything, that's when you know you're in trouble.
Yeah, not according to Christian history.
Well, but that's the thing. It's I've learned so much that on a journey and stuff that I love the journey.
Yeah. So I have one last thing that I want to present to you. Bishop Spong, at the end of his Why Christianity Must Change, he started off by talking about the Apostles' Creed. And then he said at the end, so how might I change it today? What is differently true for me today than in that creed that he both memorized and spoke throughout his career, right? In the church that of which he was a bishop, they spoke that every single week. They would read that Apostles' Creed. And so he said, what else might be true? So I want you to just listen to his words. And this is from the end of Why Christianity Must Change. He said, I believe that there is a transcending reality present in the very heart of life. I name that reality God. I believe that this reality has a bias towards life and wholeness, and that its presence is experienced at that which calls us beyond all of our fearful and fragile human limits. I believe that this reality can be found in all that is, but that it reaches self-consciousness and the capability of being named, communed with, and recognized only in human life. I believe that heaven, the domain in which this reality has traditionally been domiciled, is not a place, but a symbol standing for the limitlessness of being itself. I believe that this realm of heaven is entered whenever the barriers that seem to bind human life into something less than that for which it is capable are set aside. I believe in Jesus, called Messiah or Christ. I believe that in his life, this transcendent reality has been revealed so completely that it causes people to refer to him as God's Son, even God's only Son. The burning intensity was so real in him, the burning God intensity was so real in him that I look at his life and say, in you, I see the meaning of God. So for me, you are both Lord and Christ. I believe that Jesus was a God presence, a powerful experience of the reality of that ground of being undergirding us all at the very depths of life. I believe in that gift of the Spirit who is called the giver of life. Once we located God only externally and called this God the Father Almighty. Next, we located God in Jesus and we called him the Son incarnate. Now we locate God in every person and we call this God the Holy Spirit. I believe that this Spirit inevitably creates a community of faith that will come in time to open this world to God as the very ground of its life and being. We call this community one because the source of life is one. We call it holy because the holy God is seen through it. We call it Catholic because it is universal and must embrace the whole of creation and all the families of faith. We call it apostolic because it was recognized as present in Jesus and it flowed to us through the witness of his apostles and disciples. That is our point of entry. It will not be our conclusion. We also name Jesus as inclusive because nothing can separate us from the ground of being or from those whose lives share in the being of God. Not even the name of Jesus must be allowed to do that. I believe, therefore, that being in touch with the ground of being creates the universal communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the reality of resurrection, and the doorway into life that is everlasting. The only divine mission in life that the church of the future could possibly have is to open people to a recognition that the ground of their being is holy, and that when they are in touch with that holy ground of being, they can share in God's creation by giving life, love, and being to others. I don't think that's a perfect definition, but it's pretty damn good.
It'd be a lot to read in the service, though.
Yeah, it's a lot to read at service, isn't it? It definitely draws me and inspires me better than what the Apostles' Creed has been able to. Maybe at one point the Apostles' Creed had that type of inspiration, that inspirational draw, but it's lost some of that for me, where this speaks to me differently and better that way. I think that's what we're trying to do in ourselves, is try to figure out how to speak this ground of all being, this idea of connection between human and divine in such a way that it re-inspires us to move forward. Is that a task worth having? I appreciate you being on this journey with me. I will, that last piece that I wrote, it is in the document that's entitled Week 1 Introduction, so that you've got that if you want to reread it. But read through those chapters and have a good time connecting with both Bishop Spong, but also hopefully through Bishop Spong to that ground of being that he speaks of. Any last words before we go?
Thank you for all your work.
All right, my friends, you take care of you. I look forward to seeing you more.
Lovely to see you.
Yep.